Hi everyone, it's John Mitchell. In this video we're going to look at the concept of the force field analysis. Now force field analysis is the process of identifying and analysing the forces that will drive and those that will resist a proposed change. So when a business has some kind of proposed change or something that it wants to implement, they'll look at the forces that drive and those that resist. So when we look at those forces, we call them driving and restraining forces. Driving forces are those that are going to support the particular change and help push the business towards the new state or towards the change, and restraining forces are those that are going to work against the change. And so a force field analysis is a way of identifying those particular forces and then analysing them to see how powerful they will be. So if the restraining forces are too strong, the business will find it very difficult to implement the change successfully. So ideally what the business wants to do is have enough driving forces that will help overcome those restraining forces and push the business towards the change. So let's just look at an example. Now let's say, for example, there's a business that wants to implement an automated production line. There would be forces that would support that change and push the business towards that particular change, and they are the driving forces. And they could be things like increased profit margins. Maybe it improves productivity. It could be that it reduces the overall long-term costs. Maybe they're able to operate on a larger scale now and generate economies of scale. Now I'm just making those things up. However, you can see how they could be forces, driving forces that are helping support this business in implementing an automated production line. But on the flip side, there would also be restraining forces. Things like high setup costs. Possibly they're fearing loss of jobs and that could cause industrial action. Maybe they have a lack of space in their current facility, so they feel they'll have to purchase a new facility, which again is going to be costly. So once a business has identified what those driving and restraining forces are, it helps give them a really clear picture of, well, is this change going to be successfully implemented? Are there enough driving forces to help support the change? And are there ways of overcoming the restraining forces? So once part of the analysis is to sort of give a numerical figure, or at least look at the power, how powerful each force is. So for example, it may be that the most powerful driving forces are those of improved productivity, so they give that a rating of 5, and also being able to generate economies of scale. And this, on the flip side, the exact same thing can happen with the restraining forces. So maybe the most powerful restraining force is that it's a high setup cost and the business doesn't have a lot of disposable income in order to implement the automated production line. So that is something they need to overcome. So by writing down these forces, the business is then able to really analyse and see whether this change is going to be successful. And what they can do is they can say, well, at least we know the hurdles that we're going to face in terms of this particular change. If we can, the business will then look and say, well, if they can overcome some of those particular restraining forces and maybe even turn them into driving forces, then that can help them overcome those restraining forces and actually implement the change successfully. So it's just a way of identifying and analysing the particular forces for and against the change. Now, what are the benefits of that? So some benefits of using a force field analysis include that the managers are able to identify and analyse those forces for and against the change, so they can really make an informed decision about whether the change is worth pursuing and worth investing in. It also allows managers to develop ways of reducing the restraining forces. So for example, if it's anxiety or resistance from the employees because they fear they're going to be using some new technology in the previous example of an automated production line, then it may be that they know that they can implement training to help overcome that resistance and reduce the impact of that restraining force. It also allows actions and timelines to be developed. So one thing we didn't go into on the previous slide was, well, once they've analysed the particular forces for and against the change, well then if they're going to implement it, they can help put some actions in place on how to overcome those restraining forces and how to really build up those driving forces, and also put timelines to that. So it really gives a clear action plan on how to implement the particular change if they decide to go ahead with it. It also identifies stakeholders that will likely be supportive of the change and really lean on them and use them to help drive the change, and also those that may resist the change, so they can be identified and help supported through the change if they're going to cause some major resistance. So that's really the idea of a force field analysis. It was developed by Kurt Lewin, and really looking at a particular change and the forces that are going to help support the change, we call them driving forces, and those that are going to work against the change and keep this, what we call the status quo, in terms of keeping the business in its current state, and we call those things restraining forces. So for questions, activities and more, then come on over to teachingbubble.com.